Okay, this is going to be a quick little review of this mini UPS system. So let's take a quick look at what you actually get in the package. To begin with, you get the mini UPS, which is here. You get an instruction manual. You get an adapter to your USB type A. And then you also have these tips. There are a total of 8 of these tips, and I'll quickly go over those in a moment. You also get these wires, which are the conduits to your item that you're going to be hooking up to the unit. Then you also have the power source, which is a regular 12-volt power source. So let me talk a little bit about the actual unit itself. To begin with, in terms of materials and dimensions, this is an all plastic mini UPS. In terms of dimensions, it's about 16 centimeters in length. It is about 11 centimeters in width. And in terms of height, it is just over 3 centimeters in height. Let me go over the various sides here of the unit. So on top, it's just a plain cover here. It's got a bit of branding on the top. On one side here, you can see the main power port into the wall, and then you've got some ventilation. On the back, you have nothing, and then on the other side, you've got some more ventilation. And then on the bottom side, you've got the ability to mount this unit, although there's no mounting screws provided, so that's something you're going to have to supply on your own. There's also a couple of markings here with respect to the capacity of the battery at 15,000 milliamps, and then the appropriate markings for the different jurisdictions. And then finally on the front, this is where all the action is. Here you can see that there's a power button. You can see that there's a power marker here, which has 4 LEDs depending on how much power is remaining in the unit. You've got your USB type A port, and again, all of these ports here also have small LEDs to let you know that they're operational. So again, this is the USB type A port. Then you have 4 DC ports. They're all for barrel plugs, and these are for 5 volt, 9 volt, and then 2 12 volts, and all of them are 2 amps. So this type of unit is something that's going to be great to be used in a home setting. Again, because of the size, you can get a sense it's just about the size of my hand, almost akin to a large external hard drive. So because of that form factor, it can be used in a variety of settings, and it's something that looks clean and nice. And I have a full-sized UPS, which is quite large, bulky, and heavy. So that really takes away from having to worry about that in terms of moving it around. This is only 466 grams in total weight, so it's easy to move around and easy to take with you if you need. The biggest benefit with something like this is the ability to be, if you're working and you suddenly have a blackout, you can, or some kind of cut to the power, you have the ability to, stay online with respect to your work and not lose that documentation. And with a lot of people working at home these days, something like this I think is a smart investment to have. Just in case you do have that unexpected power outage. Now let me go over a couple of other things here. How does something like this work? Well, let's take a quick look. The way this actually turns on is you just press this little power button here, and you can see how it all lights up here, and you can see it's currently fully charged right now. And the way that you would actually use this is you would have one of these cables plugged into the appropriate port, and then you would attach one of these tips to the tip into the item that you want to plug into the unit, and then you would again power this up by having it plugged into the wall. So in my case, I plan to use this again with a modem, so that I'll have one side plugged into the modem, and then I'll have this plugged into the wall, so that if I should lose power, my modem will continue operating. I do a lot of work on the cloud. This will save me a great deal of potential problems by having it hooked up to my modem so that I don't have any issues in any circumstances where I might lose work because of an unexpected power cut. And especially as the summer approaches and people have a lot of their AC units going, we may end up experiencing, depending on where you're located, whether it's a big city or not, you may experience something where you do have some power issues that come up this year. Now, additionally, as I mentioned here, you've got these tips. There's a total of 8 of them, as well as the one for the USB. I'll just quickly zoom in here on these tips so you can get a sense of what you actually get here. So again, you get 8 of these in total, and they're used for various items depending on what you may use this with. Again, I plan to use it strictly with my modem, but it does have the ability to be used with other items such as security cameras and so forth. I haven't had the opportunity yet to necessarily check the full capacity of this unit, but what my expectations are for my modem based on its configuration is that I should get a few hours of backup support from this unit, and that's more than enough. And as I said, for me it's a matter of making sure that I don't lose any work unexpectedly. So if I have something like this and give me a few more hours, that'll certainly allow me to get work organized and so forth, so I can get things cleaned up and put away in the case of a power outage. But something that's nice to have, as I mentioned, and I think it's actually critical to have these days, especially if you do work from home. And again, because of the nature and the form factor of this, it can be used in a variety of settings. So a really nice unit to have, and so far it hasn't had any issues with respect to having used it with the modems for a slight period of time. But certainly it's going to be placed there now full time, and hopefully it won't be needed. But just in case it is, I'll be able to rest easy knowing that I do have some backup power to that unit. So anyways, I thought I'd just highlight a few of these things, go over some of the aspects of this. It does also have, for example, the ability to protect. There's some protection aspects to this with respect to temperatures and so forth, so you can be you can feel safe with respect to the unit monitoring itself as well. So that's nice to see. So anyways, this has been a quick little review of this mini UPS, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one.
What are my review of the mini 15,000 mAh uninterruptible power supply, which is really meant to drive power to networking equipment in the event of power failure off of the input DC barrel jack, and keeps running 5 volt, 9 volt, and 12 volt power on the back of the unit off the built-in lithium-ion battery. It's also versatile enough to use as a mini power bank, having a USB port for charging tablets, smartphones, and has a set of adaptable DC barrel jack tips for plugging in different types of equipment. I've got it running for a couple of hours now, drawing power off of its 3 DC barrel jack plugs simultaneously for about 15 watts of power consumption, and it's still going pretty strong. It's showing about 75% indicator. On the back of the unit, you'll notice there are 4 different DC barrel jack outputs, one of them at 5 volt, 2 amps, while the others are gauged at 9 volt, 12 and 12 volt respectively. And there is also a USB type A port, adding even more convenience to plugging in different types of devices, whether it's a smartphone or a tablet, for charging off of this mini UPS. Although it's not really meant to be used as a power bank, the 15,000 mAh battery is great for having the convenience of reliable and stable power flow to networking equipment, but there is that USB plug if you ever need it. And then it does also come with a USB to DC barrel jack adapter, which fits on the DC wire and turns that into an additional USB plug. It does have also ETL markings, including the wire itself, and they are fairly well gauged wiring that comes with a 22 AWG, which means that it should handle that 12 volt 2 amp quite seamlessly. There's also a set of wall mounting pegs, which is great because this is going to be using plugged into routers and switches. Having a mini UPS that's wall mounted is a great way to keep all the cables and the unit well organized. In terms of build quality, it is made out of a rigid plastic shell, being ABS, and that's quite important because this is something that has a battery pack inside of it and needs to be heat resistant and does have that ventilation holes right along the sides on both ends of the unit. Well, the back of the unit does have a metal plate in front of the ports, adding a little bit of rigidity to its otherwise plastic shell, and it is fairly lightweight, which is quite interesting because it has a 15,000 mAh battery. That's something I'm going to take a look at in terms of how long does that battery last. Even though it's a UPS, meaning it's meant to really just power flow when the power cuts out off of the 120 volt, still allowing DC transformed 12 volt output or 5 volt and 9 volt to run to networking equipment. Has that power indicator right on the back, and that toggle switch is basically you hold it down for a couple seconds for it to actually turn on and off. But other than that, it mostly just indicates the battery life, and when you have it consistently plugged in, it will keep it charged up while draining the battery only when the power off of the input jack gets cut off. So now I have DC 5 volt plugged into the DC 5 volt jack, and it is powering up just fine. And one thing to note is that the DC jack cable is a 2.1 millimeter instead of 2.5 millimeter. So while it might work on some types of devices, it might require plugging in a bunch of tips in front. And here's a look at what the DC pins look like. You basically have different types of sizes, and while technically speaking you could plug one of these into a laptop, you still would be limited by the 12 volt power output on that rail. So that is something to be aware of, that it does work at 5 volt, 9 volt, and 12 volts. Once you have the input jack connected, it will start to show a charging indicator of it topping up the battery pack. With that plugged in, there does seem to be a little bit of power fluctuation, but that's to be expected when you're pushing it to its limits, since the battery pack can drive the power, but then the DC charging jack is only meant for passively charging it, so it might be limited in terms of how many devices you can have simultaneously plugged in. So I'm going to go ahead and unplug the cable from the input jack to see how fast does it transfer over the power from, and that was basically instantaneous in terms of shifting the load off of the DC jack to the battery pack. The mini UPS is not really heating up so far. I mean, I've pushed it to quite a bit of power limit, having multiple devices connected simultaneously. Although with that, it might not get the full 24 watts on the DC jack, but at least the uninterruptible power supply functions quite seamlessly, transferring over the power flow into the DC jack. So I'm going to go ahead and do that again, and you'll see that it basically cut off from the DC jack and went on to the battery pack basically instantly. So overall, this UPS does work powering up networking equipment, mainly because it is limited to the power output off of its rear ports, and the USB port is a handy addition to being able to still charge up smartphones or other devices, turning it into a more versatile battery bank with a 15,000 milliamp hour capacity. While the tips included do allow for plugging into different types of devices, it's mostly going to be limited down with the 12 volt 2 amp, which really worked more closely as 1 amp. But the powerful handoff between having an input plugged in and turning on to the UPS's internal battery pack does work instantly, keeping equipment running even with power outages, and that's a great way of both protecting equipment and having a reliable battery backup so that you're powering off multiple security cameras, routers, firewalls, and other types of equipment simultaneously off of this, bearing in mind its total power capacity limitation and battery runtime.